Good evening, my name is Rachel. I will have two questions. It's been two interesting topics that have been discussed. After listening to the taxation topic, it's kind of giving me a reflection. I'm a Zambian citizen, and I have a question when it comes to the taxation, because I think after the privatization of Zambia, the government of Zambia came in with a 10-year tax-free for foreign investors to invest in Zambia. But one of the trends that is very common is that you see after the 10 years, they pack their bags, no anything to leave to the people or anything of structure. They come in with do structures, they make their profits, and after 10 years they close up and go. And this has been a continuous trend. And then one of the things that they tried to come up with, like Zambia, they privatized the copper mines and everything, was that they tried to bring in some tax. The government, about 2 years ago, tried to negotiate and bring in some taxes that is going to at least give the profits due to the copper mines since they are not owning them. But when they did that, most of the foreign investment companies, some of them sold their shares, which meant that some of the copper mines were closed, and it meant to unemployment and stuff. And then there's also an issue saying that they need to group together. In Africa, you have like the SADC. There is the SADC, there is the West African Partnership and everything. But how come when it comes to negotiations, still it comes back to the countries themselves to negotiate, and then they have no bargaining power. And at the end of the day, it's only that there's nothing which remains even for people for them to benefit, and hence it brings in more issues. So how do we learn, and how do we maybe go and advise our fellow people back home to say maybe you do it this other way? Because when we seem to it is kind of a web that even if they try certain issues, maybe even being it's a free zone, it's still nothing that benefits the country. So how best can we learn from that, and how do we learn it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks to both of you for really, really fascinating presentations. It was just such extraordinary inputs, and very different, but also very much related. I suppose listening to Massa talking about the situation in Liberia, she spoke very strongly about the idea of the resources curse, and this idea that having the richness of natural resources resulted in there being absolutely no accountability, no relationship between the people in power and the people with access to the resources and the people who should have been benefiting from them. And I'm really interested to hear from both of you to say, how do you think that better tax compliance in Liberia might improve governance, particularly in the Liberian situation, particularly since I suppose you've talked so strongly about the corruption in the country, and can a better tax regime have any impact on improving the nature of accountability and transparency in the governance there?
Three interesting and very difficult questions. I guess the first one on how to make more clear the link between tax and aid. That's something there's a group called the Tax Justice Network who are set up in Europe, Africa, South America and North America are working on. And what's probably needed is to have a new accounting standard so that it's clearer where companies are making their profits and making their taxes. And there is an international campaign on this accounting standard to have what's called country by country reporting. So instead of the large multinational groups reporting we made X million, we paid this much tax, they'll say we made this much in this country and this much tax here, and it'll be clear what they're doing. Because the biggest thing they have going for them at the moment is that nobody can see what they're doing except them. And tax is still levied at a national basis, but the companies are above that. So that's really quite difficult. So I think the country by country reporting will probably cover that one. Will I address the three and then pass it to you, Massa? Or do you want to? Okay. And on Rachel's point, with Zambia, with this people having their 10-year tax holiday and packing up and leaving, we used to have that too. Because the key is that you say it's a 10-year holiday and then they will leave because they know they're there for 10 years. What changed it in Ireland, why they stayed a little longer, was because almost all the government parties and non-government parties are agreed on this low tax thing. In the last elections we had in 2007, the last general election, all the parties were agreed on 12.5% tax, except Sinn Féin, who had a modest proposal to increase it to 17.5%, which is still regarded as incredibly low by European standards. So countries know that that in Ireland the tax rates will always be low. It's just kind of the way it is here. But even that isn't sustainable. They're leaving Ireland now. Manufacturing companies will leave when it becomes more expensive. You cannot keep them. R&D might keep them a little. On the copper mines and how to make that sustainable, I'm not sure Ireland should lecture anybody on how to make the best use of our natural resources. So I leave that to somebody else, I think, because we're not very good at that ourselves. And finally, this Carol's point on how can tax compliance improve governance. I think one point on that, and I know Massa will have more to say, is on the resource course, if a country's getting all their income from the royalties from their natural resources rather than from the population paying tax, they're not as accountable to the people. It's the person who pays the piper calls the tune, as they say in Ireland. So if the revenue isn't coming from people, people feel they have less stake, and the government feels they have less stake, and that undermines the whole thing. So if the tax base can be wider, I think it does have a knock-on effect on democracy.
Okay. I would attempt to answer the lady who spoke from, is it Zambia, Gambia?
Yeah.
Zambia? Okay. I don't remember the last two questions, but I think I remember one. I think one of your questions bordered around how can a country get back, say whether in form of taxes or whatsoever from businesses doing companies doing business. In Liberia, in the early 50s, the late President William V.S. Tubman introduced what he called the open door policy, and it was intended to attract businesses and large companies into Liberia for the purpose of investment. So what he did was, under this policy, companies came and they had tax waiver, they didn't pay taxes. But what history is showing that happened here is that while these companies received tax waiver at the governmental level, but at the official level, they were actually getting kickbacks. That's what happened. So now, for example, if you have logging companies in the area, say, in the Putu mountain range, Liberia is vast in dense rainforest. So if you have